Okay, yeah, welcome everybody to our panel of today. I'm more than happy to be here with all my speakers and talk about transparency, standardization, and identifiers in digital assets. And before we start right into it, I'm the moderator of today. I'm Nadine, one of the co-founders of Particular. And we are, basically rating agencies for all kind of tokenized assets. So we are analyzing, writing reports, creating ratings, and standardization. And that terms is a big topic for us. It's important for our business, but it's also important for the whole industry. So before we start into introducing the panelists of today, I would like to take this opportunity to also make a little bit advertisement for our big in-person event. It's called Token Future 2024, which will be on the 18th of June in Frankfurt. If you not heard about that yet, you can just find tokenfuture.io, their website, and get more information and the agenda there. For everybody who will be happy to join, I have for everyone watching a code. I will just take the screen for a second, and I hope you can see it. So now I give you time to scan the code. The invite code is new standards. It will be active until the 30th of May. So you have around about 3 days to use the code, and hope to see you in person and also talk about more standardization topics and of course tokenization in person. Just wait a second. Okay. Otherwise, we are also recording that. So in the end, you can always just go back to this to this time, and you can also screenshot later then. Okay. To go now into the topic, I would like to please introduce everybody here in the call, especially all the panelists, of course. Who are you? What are you doing? What is your focus in terms of digital asset? And also very, very interesting, how did you come into the rabbit hole? Because I guess everybody here has a TradFi background. So it's always interesting to hear what was your path. Take a few minutes, everybody, and then I would say we start with Stefan.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Stefan Dreyer, Managing Director at the Association of National Numbering Agencies, also known as ANA. We are a global trade association whose members represent key market infrastructures within the financial services industry. So the likes of stock exchanges, CSDs, data vendors, central banks, and regulators. So in addition to looking after the association kind of daily operations, I've been tasked to look at the digital assets topic strategically for ANA. There's essentially two paths, and I should point out that ANA is the registration authority for the International Securities Identification Numbers, for the ISIN code, as well as a number of other ISO standards. And they're looking in the digital asset space. It was important to understand what the impact of DLT and blockchain implementation meant for the identification of assets. And so we looked at it from two vantage points, one being asset tokenization, in particular the likes of stocks and bonds, so other financial instruments that were being issued in a tokenized form or digital form. And there we continue to use the standards as we have historically, but look to complement them for additional layers of transparency with our partners at the DTI Foundation. And Dennis will introduce himself and talk more about that. The other aspect is looking at new types of tokens that are out there that are not financial instruments. So e-money tokens, asset reference tokens, essentially the crypto world, and looking to expand the coverage and utilization of ISIN and the other standards in that space. Again, they're working to develop new XT prefix ISINs, which are based on DTIs, and that was work that we started rolling out in October of last year. Happy to speak to everybody about the standardization topic.
Great. Then Nicola, next one.
Yeah, hi everybody who is watching us. And first of all, Nadine and Marta, thanks for inviting us. Thanks for organizing this panel. A little bit about myself, Nikola Ristic, Business Development and Product Development Manager at VM Datenservice. For the ones who do not know VM Datenservice, this is the leading information service provider in Germany with more than 75 years of experience in the area of financial data. My focus are digital assets, so everything which connects digital assets and data. Previously, I have been working for Deutsche Börse for about 10 years, but since 2016, I work on different areas of Deutsche Börse connected to digital assets, among others, also these 7 who are very active in this space, digital asset space. Glad to be here today.
Awesome, thank you. Then Dennis.
Hi, pleasure to be here. My name is Dennis Donayev. Since 2021, I've been product owner at the DTI Foundation, overseeing all of the operational and strategic goals here. In 2021, we launched DTI Foundation when eTrading Software, our parent company, was named as a registration authority for the new DTI standard, 24165. It came from ISO, which initially looked at expanding the currency codes standard, which is 4127, before quickly realizing that there's not enough 3-letter codes for all the digital currencies out there. So they created a new standard. About me quickly, I started off in equity technology. I was there for 15 years, running trade floor application support, and then before moving to development and running the global data analytics team. After that, and prior to DTI Foundation, I moved to eTrading Software and was consulting and advising banks on MiFID II implementation, AML, and market abuse monitoring. Really goal for us in DTI Foundation is to introduce standards to the crypto markets because I think they desperately need it. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And Axel?
Yeah, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Axel Jester. I spent a bit more than 30 years in the areas of information technology and financial data, starting at IBM in various positions, being responsible for some of the largest banks and introducing all kinds of information technologies to the banks. Then moving on to JP Morgan in investment banking and equity sales and equity research, having to do there a lot with identifiers and trading floor and trading systems. Moved on to Thomson Reuters. We have been a bit more than 13 years managing director for Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and several CEE countries with all the products around market data, risk management systems, portfolio management systems, and therefore as well having to do with a lot of identifiers, of which, of course, the Reuters identification RIC was one of the major ones. Been at WM as well as Nikola today. Yeah, been there for digital platforms and as a manager for the legal entity identifiers, working with Clive, introducing the LEI and as well the VLEI, and now supporting particular in their business development, in the acquisition of the ITSA association, and well in the classification system of tokenized assets and making them market ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for introducing yourself. And I think we have the right people here on this panel to talk about standardization and identifiers, I guess. Maybe for everybody who are listening and don't have a TradFi background, can maybe you, Stefan, or also Axel, can someone of you elaborate why were identifiers established in TradFi? Like why were they therefore also the standards which are coming with them? Like you mentioned ISINs, there are the LEEs and so on. So why do we have them in TradFi, and why it is interesting or important to have that also in digital assets? So some of you.
Yeah. Stefan, I start and you enhance and enrich my comments, please? Yeah. So looking back, yeah, so I looked a bit into the history of identifiers. Yeah, so one of the first one has been the WKN, so the Wertpapierkennnummer, which has been introduced in 1955 already, which was then followed by the QSIP from S&P in 1968. So if you look back, yeah, so this is far ahead of any IT systems which has been used in banks, 1955. Yeah, so if you think about the introduction of a PC, yeah, which was in the early 80s, so long before that time. The RIC from Reuters was introduced in the early 1980s, so with the usage of PCs. So looking back into very traditional financing instruments, TradFi, Nadine, yeah, so this has been a long time around, and there was a clear need for the identifiers at that time, which is the same today. Yeah, so it's trust building. It's a clear, unique identification of an instrument to avoid any misunderstandings. And using the identifier, which then allows usage in all kinds of IT systems and straight-through processing, risk management system, trading systems, and to allow very smooth automatic handling, and as well quality checks, and for many as well the risk management around an identifier, and of course all kinds of derivatives which are based on an underlying identifier. Other identifiers, of which one of the major ones is FIGI, which has been introduced by, I think in 2009 by Bloomberg, now covering some 600 million financial instruments. So very comprehensive in the database, and this now to be enhanced and enriched by the DTI or ITIN for the further usage of tokenized assets, which is a different case than the underlying, which is identified by an ISIN usually, or FIGI or a RIC, plus then the tokenized characteristica of the token, being it the technology, being it a regulatory framework, which then enriches and is really the most important thing for getting tokenized assets to be used on a professional and institutional level.
Great. Thank you. I think the historical facts are really, really important here to understand that. And I think, Stefan, you also want to maybe add something. And I think, Nicola, it would be also interesting to hear your point of view, because we, WM Data Services, is of course also one who worked very long with those identifiers in the classical space. So Stefan, maybe you first, and then Nicola.
Yeah, sure. So Axel mentioned a number of historical national identifiers that existed just a little over 40 years ago. In order to facilitate global trading and settlement, there was a recognized need for an international identification number. So that international identification number, the ISIN code, which is an ISO standard, and I think that is what makes it unique and different to things like the FIGI, which Axel also cited, meaning that the standard is developed by national standards bodies within the ISO framework. So national experts are sent in a particular area to help develop and keep that standard then fit for purpose. So there's a framework that makes sure that the standards go through a cyclical systematic revision. In particular, the ISIN, and Axel cited a lot of the benefits of standards. I think irrespective of the identifier that you're looking at, there are needs for firms for facilitating data management, back office operations, risk and compliance, so wanting to be able to aggregate your exposure, having a unique identification for a particular asset that is machine readable, that can be transferred to the life cycle or used to transfer data through the life cycle of a particular asset. So the ISIN has a 40-year history, and within the ISIN, so the ISIN is an identification number, and there are other standards out there that have been developed within the ISO framework that do or serve another purpose. So we have, for example, the classification of financial instruments, the CFI code, which is used to classify the asset and not just to identify it. We have FIFN, which is a descriptor. And then there are standards that are out there managed by other entities. So the LEI was also cited to be able to identify the entity that is issuing a particular asset. And I think what is important to note is that Anna and the individuals involved or organizations involved with the ongoing development of ISIN have worked very hard to ensure that where there are other standards out there, these standards are brought together in a complementary way. So the LEI has been introduced as part of the ISIN record, a mandatory data element. So if you have an identifier for an asset, you're also able to have that interoperability to be able to see who is the actual legal entity behind the asset. And bringing us to the topic of today, the digital assets, with the development and introduction of the digital token identifier. That is a model that we are looking to pursue as well to ensure that ISIN and DTI work together in a complementary fashion. So where you have an asset that is deployed or issued on multiple networks, you can have one or more DTIs, which are part of the ISIN record and will allow you to identify the particular tokens and therefore assess potential risk related to that token.
Mm-hmm. Great. Nicola.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, identifiers are the core, I would say, of our VM data service business, and we are part of ANA, where Stefan is managing director of, and we were supporting different kind of standards and identification in general. I mean, when we talk about identifiers or more general about standards, I think they ease communication among market participants. They enable that market participants can compare different assets, or that they know that they compare on common basis. To a large extent, they also prevent huge reconciliation costs, where in the financial industry, this is a big pain point. So I think the standards are the base for the development of the financial markets and also for the digital assets.
Yeah. Yeah, I think really important points here, right? So we have at one side the identification and classification, and then we also have kind of like the tracking, right? And maybe to give insights also from my point of view as particular, because in 2022 we started basically with a database aggregating extensively data to see, okay, what is out there on those digital assets and what makes them different from each other, and how can we compare them in the different asset classes with each other. And quickly we noticed that, for instance, in the environmental space, that there were like 12 different carbon tokens, which are named carbon tokens. And you have like no clue, like what is the difference between of those 12 carbon tokens. And I think it's an issue when you as an investor, it's not really clear what is it for an asset, and when I invest, is it the right one or not? Like I think this is where we notice the first time, okay, there has to be something in place, otherwise we will have a problem at some point, because we can't track or identify or invest in the right assets.
Yeah, I think you were mentioning the really important point, also taxonomy. And I mean, you know that we are talking about digital assets, but what are digital assets? What are crypto assets? I think different people understand differently these terms. So I think that's why it's really important to really categorize and to identify them in the right way. That's
right. And maybe to also give it the word to Dennis, because I think it's really interesting what you guys are doing in the space compared to the, I will say, traditional companies, because we also, or Axel also mentioned the ITSA, which is, maybe you heard about them. It's International Token Standardization Association. They started back then, created also ISIN equivalent, so to say. It's called ITIN. I think you, Dennis, maybe you can give insight there. What is the difference between your association to the ITSA association, and also, why did you start it with the focus on digital assets? Because I think there's nobody else doing it, right? Or I have not seen anyone else in the market doing that.
Well, I think there are multiple companies doing that, but like you said, they are private companies or associations. We are the only registration authority for the ISO standard. which means it's an international standard. It's overseen by ISO. Like Stefan said, it's national standards bodies contribute to the development of the standard. So we fit in nicely within the kind of the ISO family. So again, like, going back to what Stefan said, there is a link between the LEI and ISIN and DTI, and we're working with Glyph now to incorporate the issuer LEI identification, and also through ISIN to get the CFI and FISIN and all the other standards that are already available within financial markets. So our goal is to make sure that DTI provides that granular view, and like you mentioned, the carbon token, for example, to be able to distinguish those tokens from one another based on technical verifiable data, but link it to the traditional standards that are already used within the industry, so that they are complementary. It's not a competition to ISIN. It's an addition to ISIN. So we've been working on mapping all of the DTIs and introducing the new XT ISIN for digital assets, but also incorporating DTI for all of the newly tokenized assets for existing financial instruments, or for new financial instruments. So I'd say, to answer your question, is that what sets us apart is that we are non-profit. We are looking at the ISO standard, and that's the only one that's available globally. And it fits in nicely within ISO family. Yeah.
Great. And maybe one follow-up question, and also Axel and Stefan, feel free to answer as well. In traditional finance, when we look at the identifier, I heard that there's no global system, but it's different, right, on the region or something. Do we have, or do we will have, in terms of digital asset identifier, a global numerical system, or will there be differences compared, for instance, take the United States compared to Europe, compared to the whole Asian market? Yeah.
On DTI side, just to answer that, it is a global standard. So it's the same number. So we have identifier for Bitcoin. It is the same identifier wherever you are. We have tokens that have been issued in Asia, in Africa, in US, in Canada, obviously Europe and UK. So it is completely global. It's not separated. It is we hold the golden master, but anybody who connects to us able to download that and use it internally for tracking different assets and getting the information that's linked to them.
Okay, so your perspective on that is that there will be in future, when it comes to digital asset, a unified global system.
It's already there, yeah.
We're
looking
like that.
Yeah, by definition, crypto assets cannot be, the way we're kind of developing this, that we are trying to be, or we are working jurisdictionally agnostic. So we know that there is a disagreement between different jurisdictions around what is a digital asset, what is a financial asset, what is a security. Right now, that's up to regulators, and I think that will be a long battle. I was on a conference last week, kind of discussing stable coins, and in the definition of a stable coin, some experts suggested might take up to 10 years. Because different regulators will say it's slightly different thing, how much money you have to have in the reserve and all that. So we're looking at agnostically what the regulators decide and provide a global database for anybody in the world connect. It's already there, and it serves the world.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, maybe to add, yeah, and it's about the adoption of the identifier, and the global adoption clearly maximizes the value of each of the identifiers, yeah, and no one is interested in a fragmented world. But the introduction of an identifier is extremely important, yeah, for the adoption, yeah. So having an ISO standard is already then a global standard, which helps a lot. which is not a guarantee that it's adopted in the different legislations, but a very good underlying base. Yeah? So if I compare it with the LEI and the Clive Foundation, which has been introduced by the G20 initiative and in 2014, and which has seen quite different adoptions. Yeah, it's quite well adopted in Germany and in Europe. It's not so well adopted in several other legislations. Yeah, so in a sense, what we see in terms of financial instruments is clearly the global adoption of things, and we have very good reasons behind. But the identifier as such is not self-serving. Yeah, it's the taxonomy and the framework behind which serves with additional information. As Dennis said, yeah, then which regulatory environment is relevant for this DTI or for this token? Is it a commodity? Is it a financial instrument? Is it MiFID relevant or is it MiCA relevant? And having all this kind of information, and as well then getting into deeper elements of the token, for example, the smart contract, which then has elements of the LEI for the counterparty and identifying the counterparty and managing counterparty risk. But it's as well that the smart contract over the lifetime could change its nature, yeah, from a financial instrument into something else. Yeah. So it's extremely important to identify and as well to have a reference coded in the smart contract about the LEI and other related instruments, so that you can have a smooth, low risk and risk mitigating operation based on the identifier.
If I could just add to what Dennis and Axel have said, and I'd just like to point out that the ISIN is also a global standard, and it has been for 40 years, right? So, and it's in the name, international, to basically take over where the national identifiers could not continue to perform that function. So we have 120 national numbering agencies around the globe. And what is different, so the standard is a standard, it's a 12-character alphanumeric with a prefix, a base number, and a checksum digit. So the way that it's derived and assigned by any of the NNAs is the same. But what has changed, or what might not be perceived as being international, is the fact that they have a federated model in the allocation rules. And that's simply because the securities markets in each country are very, very different. And it's important to have that local knowledge, so the way that the markets work in Hong Kong from the way that they work in the EU countries or in the US, to be able to understand the regulation and the legislation that is happening in the securities market. And so therefore we have, this international standard implemented at national levels. So the 120 members who are covering more than 220 countries globally. So we have the global coverage. When we look at the digital assets, we don't see anything changing on the financial instrument side, because at the end of the day, irrespective of the way that an instrument is issued, if it's a bond in traditional form or a bond in tokenized form, it's still a bond. And so we need that local expertise around that. But again, that's where we're looking to complement the information that is provided together with the ISIN number. And so that, and to point out, that goes beyond just the number. There's a set of reference data there that helps describe the economic attributes about that asset that come together with the actual identifier code, as well as some other standards. But again, what I was trying to say is that we want to complement that with this new piece of information that, hey, there's a DLT network that's involved for the deployment or for the issuance of that asset. And with that, there is the need for additional information. And so rather than trying to build that into the ISIN, we've taken and coupled it together with the DTI. So that's about making them complementary. On the other front, for the crypto assets, where we looked at expanding the scope of coverage for the likes of Bitcoin and Tether and Ethereum, et cetera, there we saw some challenges. So how do you implement a federated allocation model? Because with crypto assets, unlike with a lot of the financial instruments, jurisdictional aspects, issuer aspects are not as clearly defined. And so those kind of fell away, and we purposely chose to kind of leave those aside and take a more, and Dennis mentioned it, kind of jurisdiction issue-agnostic approach, and there felt that there was greater benefit in doing a centralized allocation model. So anything that's not a financial instrument is going to be assigned an ISIN in one particular way from one entity, and that entity at the moment is Anna.
Awesome. We have one question. I don't want to go over you, Stefan. I think you shared, you clarified everything around that. I will say I will like just answer or get the question into the chat here before I forget about it. Someone asked, and I think maybe it's interesting for you, Nicola, to answer that. Does the identification system also enable to receive additional data about the token? So,
yeah, I mean, it depends, of course, what is the product offering of the institution where you're asking. But yes, there is also additional, and I think very important is that the different standards, or and Stefan mentioned that as well. For example, DTI and ISIN are complementary. You know that you can link them, you can map them, and extract additional data which you have maybe on the asset level, and connect them on the token level, and then that whoever the client is has the whole picture of the whole asset, you know, including the token level or the blockchain level. So I think we have these three levels of identification, and they need to be complementary. But to answer the question, yes, there is a full spectrum of data which the client can get.
Yeah, can I just add to that, if it's okay? So the identification standards like ISIN and DTI, you know, that's one we're most familiar with. The goal is to identify the token. So all the data that's in the standard is to say, this is the token. There is unique data to say, this is a unique token. And of course, there is scope to add additional data, and it come like Nicola said, either from other standards by linking them together, but it can also come from other places. So, for example, we are working with particular. We mentioned its classification. Classification is not something that's part of DTI. It was left out on purpose because it's not used to identify the token. But we're open, you know, with particular or down the line potential other vendors to include different classification. CFI, for example, Stefan mentioned, is looking at expanding classification into crypto assets. I know there's other companies that can create their own classification. There's going to be different jurisdictional classification. So we're looking at adding those things down the line to the registry, but it's not part of the core data to identify the token.
great. Maybe to catch it up here, what do you understand about digital assets? Because we talked about a little bit that everybody understands something differently, and that classification is very important in that terms. Maybe just a personal question to everybody here: what do you understand about what is a digital asset? Because some people say it's a cryptocurrency, some people say it's tokenized real-world assets or financial assets. What are your 2 cents? Whoever wants to answer.
Well, I can start. I guess there's no, you know, digital asset is I think it's digital representation of any real world asset. So we've been familiar with those things for years, even prior to blockchain. So, you know, money has been digitized for a long time, or shares where you don't actually transfer things. You know, it's already part of the ledger somewhere. So there is already been kind of assets being digitized. I think what's different with what we're talking about now in particular is assets that are tokenized, perhaps, and exist on some sort of distributed ledger. And that adds new complexity because that opens up the market to lots of other participants. And then the identification, ownership, oversight becomes much more much more different in that world.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree with Dennis and add for me, like digital assets are a broader term than tokenized assets. For example, if you take an example in Germany under EWPG, there is the D7 system, which is doing centrally registered assets. They're pretty much digital, but they are not for me crypto assets, you know. So I think digital assets are a broader term.
Stefan, do
Yeah,
you have
I would definitely.
Oh.
I would definitely say in my mind, digital assets is the broadest term, right? It's that digital representation. That's, I kind of think of it as the umbrella. Within that, you have the different pillars. So the key pillar, and obviously coming out of the core of the work that we have done historically, being assets that existed previously, the real world assets that are now being tokenized, so primarily financial instruments, but then the other pillar being those things that are native to the blockchain that didn't exist before. So that being primarily then the cryptocurrencies as kind of the new kid on the block.
Yeah, maybe to add, yeah. So I think that the most comprehensive differentiation I've seen is actually, in particular, the PDEX classification system. They differentiate the digital assets in the different parts. Yeah, as that one part is a digital asset, which is not necessarily related to DLT technology, and then being tokenized assets being a subset of digital assets, of which then the DTI and the ITIN as well concentrate on. That it's not only a fund share, which is then currently having a digital fund share, yeah, which is traded, but it's much more to use the technology of DLT and as well the power of smart contracts. So it's a wider term, yeah, and I think as said, yeah, a very good differentiation over the more than 20 different asset classes which are comprised by the digital assets definition. It's then including debt, equity, all kind of collectibles, commodities, and other things. Yeah, so having a pretty good understanding, but all of them need to have identifiers. Yeah, so to really to differentiate the topic. And one more topic that Dennis said, yeah, the collaboration of ITSA and ITIN and DTI, as we are doing kind of identification and classification on the same topic, is that it's now a matching and enhancing the for all the users of the ITIN databases. We are adding the DTI as an additional identifier, so that customers could use both of them, ITIN and DTI, and have the transfer into the world of the global identification systems of ANA and DTIF and DTI, while using still the classification system of ITSA and the ITIN.
Awesome, great. Okay, one question I see here. Oh, we have actually two questions. Okay, first question, there is no name, so anybody who wants to answer can answer it. Which key metrics should be considered as important for investors to understand about the transparency of the token issuing company? I hope this was understandable. But yeah, which are the key metrics when you are, which are important for investors, which the issuing company should consider? Probably why they're issuing. Who wants to answer that? Stefan.
I'll jump in here. I think it's important because this is a qualitative question, right? It's about making a qualitative assessment, which is actually something, and I think Dennis would support this on the DTI side. That's not the focus of our work. It's not about providing some type of rating or qualitative metric around the issuer or the token itself, but really just acknowledging the fact that that token exists, validating it. So from the ISIN perspective, looking at it as an asset, and then the work that DTI is doing, the respective DLT implementations of that asset, given that there may be more than one. I don't know, Dennis, maybe you want to elaborate from the DTI perspective.
That's completely right, Stefan. Yeah. So I think for us the key is, does the token exist? One thing that we are working with ISO, so ISO, the standard DTI standard is going through some minor changes over this year. The new version will be published at the end of the year. And one of the things we worked with ISO to introduce is the issuer. So for us, it's important to identify the token and also to link it to a particular issuer. What sort of qualitative metrics should the issuer have? I think it just kind of depends on the jurisdiction and also depends on the type of the token. Like I mentioned, the MiCA that's coming into force this year sets out very strict guidelines around stable coins, for example. But that's not necessarily, it's not going to be the same in other jurisdictions. So I think legislation will come in and guide that.
And also for investors are not only identifiers important, but really to look into the company who is issuing, as any other financial instrument,
Yeah, like ESG, for example, yeah.
For example.
Yeah. And it starts with the legal entity identifier of the issuer, yeah. So RAE, is this company really real? And has it an LEI, and is the LEI renewed annually? Yeah, so to see if there's a kind of a quality understanding behind the company, the service provider. And then in their particular rating system, for example, then the issuer and the tokenizer is as well rated and checked, yeah, regarding who are the acting people, what is the annual report, what is the reporting, the financial reports and other things. And extremely important in terms if something goes sour or an issuer goes into insolvency, but you exactly know which tokens are related to this issuer and have a very fast understanding in the whole value chain of trading venues or custodians or investors, but something is happening with this issuer, and to be, as mentioned, to be identified with the legal entity identifier, to be unique. And so therefore, I would clearly look into this relationship of issuer LEI and related tokens.
Great. Okay, awesome. Also in the respect of time, we have two more questions. One thing which is more clarifying something which you said, Nicola, a little bit earlier. Not the last thing you said, the thing before, where it was about digital assets or the term. Privatio Holding asked Nicola, the centrally registered assets according to EWPG are digital assets. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, as I said, there are also digital assets, but they're not tokenized assets. Yeah, exactly. This is the more broader term.
Okay, because he wanted to clarify because he said the sound was at this moment a little bit jumpy. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then another question: how do you see the level of adoption among market participants for identifiers? Question to everybody. So, how's the market adoption? Maybe do you also, and I think that's interesting, do you see also a rise this year? Because I feel like, okay, this year everybody starts to be bullish more, of course, with the crypto market and the price of Bitcoin driven. But also in general, I feel like there are more and more issuances coming to the markets or are planned or in POC status or even more scalable products which are launching this year and next year. So do you also see more people requesting that? I think that this, Dennis, is also for you or for Stefan. How do you see that?
Well, for us, it's been a massive increase. Yeah, sorry, Stefan, go ahead.
All right. We'll probably end up saying the same thing. So Dennis and I have been focusing a lot on education and awareness around standards and identifiers. And so that's kind of been our mission over the last 12 to 18 months. But I would just say that, I think one unique thing that we're seeing is a lot more institutional players coming in that will have a background in TradFi, in securities markets, capital markets. And so as they are working on different projects or rolling out on more kind of mainstream tokenization of digital bonds and whatnot, I think they understand the need. They're regulated entities, and things like ISIN are already ingrained in a lot of regulatory frameworks around the globe. And so the need to continue to utilize those is great. And where we're trying to raise awareness is around things like DTI that can offer additional level of transparency to the tokenization aspects of what they're doing. I think on the other side, where you have a community that has risen kind of from a more fintech background coming in, or a more crypto native background, developing, tokenization platforms or custody wallets, or you name it, whatever type of activity, there may not be that awareness there. And that is something that, we have tried to promote. It is kind of in our mission for the promotion and of the adoption and implementation of standards, and they understand that there's a need. And I think what is important in the messaging is that standards can bring benefits irrespective of whether there's a regulatory mandate or not. Very often organizations will tend to take the stance, okay, implementation of standards in the work that we do, there's cost associated with that, so we're going to wait until the regulators come and say we have to do something. But the reality is that with early adoption, you're going to be ahead of the curve, where you have broad utilization of particular identification standards. Those are the ones that are likely to be picked up by regulators because they're already being utilized. And so I think there's some benefits, and that's what we try and cite, are the benefits of standardization, irrespective of regulatory mandates. And Dennis, you can speak a little more to DTI adoption, maybe.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Stefan, that we've seen a massive increase in DTI adoption over last year. Although we've been only live since end of 21, and part of it was the work Stefan and I done, kind of promoting the standards so that there is awareness around this. We have institutional players coming in and taking it. Swiss Digital Exchange, for example, is using DTI for their crypto and also for their tokenization platform. But we also have crypto players reached out to us, and we implemented, for example, with Crypto Compare, CC Data. They now incorporate both DTIs and ISIN in their platform. I think, kind of like Stefan said, people shouldn't wait for regulators, but we have regulators also looking at DTI. We have ESMA suggested to use it under the DLT pilot regime, and also looking to suggest to use it under MiCA. We have the Ontario Securities Commission suggested that the participants use DTI for any reporting. So it's spreading. I think it's the more around the knowledge of what the standard provides, what kind of benefit it provides, and also to some extent, is there something like this already that exists? I think a lot of people still don't know, and that's something that we're still pushing.
Good point, Dennis. I mean, people don't know that you can, that there is a ISIN for example, for Bitcoin, and so that you can really use it in your legacy systems. Yeah, and I guess would be a big breakthrough when there is adoption in the DeFi space. I guess we are not there yet, and there will be a lot of time that we reach that point, but I guess we need also in that space identifiers, especially if they want to be institutional grade.
Yeah, and the more if the tokenized assets are adopted by institutional investors and getting into the alternative asset space, the more it's adopted, the more the need of identifier and the inclusion into the current systems is mandated. So if it's only a primary market asset, which is buy and hold, then clearly the necessity is not that big. Then if you have a secondary market and liquidity, and you need to have extremely fast settlements, and as the market is picking up, and you mentioned SDX, Dennis, who is using the DTI. I've read over the weekend that we are now 1 billion bonds on the SDX, to be traded. So it's picking up, and clearly the faster the pickup goes, the more the more instruments to be rated. Currently, it's several thousand tokens which have a DTI or ITIN. And if we can believe what Goldman Sachs and other huge asset managers and issuers say, then we are ahead of a big launch initiative by institutional investors. and as well from asset managers to bring more money into tokenized assets as part of a asset allocation.
Awesome. That's already like a super good ending. So I would say maybe last question to everybody, since we are kind of like also looking in the near future and how is it adoption and how is it driven by the institution is. For everybody, what do you think in 2 to 3 years, how far will we progress in terms of standardization in digital assets? Do you think there is a lot which still has to be done, or do you feel like it's faster progressing than maybe you expected? And yeah, just like 2 or 3 sentences, everybody, what is your future view on standardization and also transparency in terms of digital assets?
I'm happy to kick it off. I think that we'll continue to make progress. I think, certainly over the last 12 to 18 months, there's been significant progress off the back of, probably a lot of negativity. But I mean, the reality is we're always going to have, in any situation, you're going to have bad actors, and those things are going to make the headlines. So I don't think that becomes kind of the way to identify kind of the whole digital asset space or crypto space. But I think progress will continue to be made. I think it obviously depends on the motivation. So I think you'll start seeing continued issuance in tokenization as organizations are looking at making efficiency plays or additional scope for liquidity. I think on the one side, I think you'll continue to see activity around stablecoins, and I think there will be a battle, between stablecoins and CBDCs. But I think the framework is correct. There's been a lot of regulatory advancement, but I think and there's a lot of collaborations out there, like the ones that we have in standardization, going to a lot of different events. You hear about a lot of different projects that are being worked on, how the community is trying to come together to build that ecosystem. So there's still work to be done, but I think it's definitely good progress. And I think it's important to note there's not a finish line, right? Because that finish line is going to keep moving. It's not a static picture, it's an evolution. And things will evolve, at different paces, but essentially they come together at some point where you get, some scaling out of that. But I think it is, new technology being introduced into a traditional world creates new opportunities, and with it, new risks, and all of these things have to come together.
Great. Nicola?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in 2-3 years, I think the standardization will be even on the higher level. The open questions which we might have now will be clear. And I really wish for the digital assets are not really considered as a separate market or separate segment of the global market, but they are fully integrated, especially, I mean, also including standardization and standards identifiers, so that we talk in 2-3 years about global financial market again, and not that we have like different markets, because I don't think that we need to. Yeah.
Great. Axel?
Yeah. I think it's clearly picking up with MiCA being one of the regulations in Europe as being the first one, giving a regulatory framework for digital assets and tokenized assets. I think from this set, was extremely important to bring this to the table and to have this operational basis in terms of how to manage these assets. I think this is the most important point which has happened recently to kick this development off. Yeah, and then it's down to use cases and the value proposition. Just to tokenize something which is already existing doesn't add any value. It really needs to provide additional value. For example, if you have tokenized money market funds which you could trade 7/24, i.e. you don't need to have open exchange times to trade and to have money which is then interest bearing, which gives you something back for your investment. And therefore, also if it's being private debt or private equity investments, which you couldn't do without the tokenization. I think these are the use cases And we see, like, for example, from Union Invest, that they offer now a fund in blockchain assets and tokenized assets, which is clearly a front runner in the market to offer these kind of services for institutional investors as well as for private investors. And if others, large asset managers, adopt this kind of same strategy and provide from a wealth management perspective, as well from liquidity perspective, an additional value, then I'm very optimistic about the next 2 to 3 years. And as mentioned, I think the big advantage which we have in Europe is the MiCA regulation, that there's complete clarity about how to handle the assets and what is belonging to MiFID and what is belonging to MiCA and which regulatory framework applies. So I think this is the thing which we then would see a lot of traction in the second half of this year.
Great. And Dennis?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of adoption of identifiers. And I think the key is, so we mentioned earlier about the kind of the crypto players adopting standards. I think when we kind of discussing about the ISO standard with crypto players, let's say why. We have our own blockchain, we have our own identifier. Why else we need something? And I think we've seen that with a lot of banks as well, that all launch their own little blockchain and it's all POCs and everything. But I think over the next 2-3 years, what we start seeing is the interoperability between these different blockchains, between the blockchains and exchanges and regulators. And when you introduce this wider ecosystem, then you need standards. You can't rely on identification of tokens in one particular blockchain that everybody understands what that means. And this is what the identification standards allow, that interoperability between different blockchains and also between different blockchains and the traditional finance. So once that kind of becomes everybody's view, the standards will automatically start being adopted and used. And the identification is really the first step of the standards within the space. We haven't even talked about the standards for smart contracts or anything else like that. I think that will come as well, and it's going to evolve in, like Stefan said, there's no finish line for that. But I think it's going to start being adopted a lot more over the next 2-3 years. Okay, great.
So to sum up, there is no end line. It is always a progress, always work in progress. And I agree with that, definitely. And I'm excited for the next 2-3 years as well to see what will actually happen. Sometimes we get surprised and sometimes we not. So let's see. I think we are done. I'm really, really thankful for everybody who took time to listening in, but also, of course, our great panelists here sharing your experience, especially from standardization, transparency. I think there were no better ones to speak about this topic. And thank you so much again for being here. For everybody who wants to hear more about digital assets, tokenization, standardization, like I said, we are organizing an event on the 18th of June in Frankfurt called Token Future. More information you can find tokenfuture.io. And of course, if you want to hear more about particular, reach out to us. And if you have any more questions, please reach out to the panelists as well. I think they're more than happy to help. And if you're an issuer looking for a number, you can probably write Dennis, and he can help you with that. Yeah, so thank you. I will now close the stream.